the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we'll be taking a look at two very important stories. The first story is with reference to what is going on with Russia and the US with regards to the alleged threat that the United States and NATO keeps talking about of Russian invasion of Ukraine. In recent developments, we saw that perhaps the situation is getting a bit milder and the relationship between both the sides is thawing. But we see now that the claims that have come are opposite to what Russia has spoken about before in terms of troop withdrawal, and the US and NATO forces have talked about how this is not the case, this is misinformation, and in fact the opposite is happening. More troops are coming at the border with Ukraine, and we see in a recent development that Russia has also expelled Washington's Deputy Chief of Mission yesterday, Mr. Bart Gorman, and this of course means that perhaps the direction which we earlier saw this entire crisis take may not be the one that it is going to take. We've also seen that earlier US proposals had been given to Russia with regards to how to move forward, and a response has been given, but we are yet to find out what exactly is in that response. It has not been made public as yet, but we're going to try and figure out what really could be the possibility, since we know what Russia has been demanding from the US and NATO for a while now, and what can we see as the future of this crisis as it develops. We will also be taking a look at what is going on within India with regards to, of course, how we have seen the Modi regime and the people involved in different political spheres in India having questionable backgrounds as well, something which is now being reiterated on international front as well. We've seen that the Singapore Prime Minister has said that almost half of Indian parliamentarians have had criminal charges. This is something that has happened on Wednesday in a debate regarding parliamentary standards. We've seen that India has, of course, reacted to this and said that this is uncalled for, and has also summoned the country's ambassador to be able to see and investigate this further and talk about this issue. A Singaporean Prime Minister's office had said that it has nothing to add to this. We'll talk about this in further detail, also take a look at what really the Prime Minister spoke about, and then of course what it implies in terms of what is going on in India and what really is so wrong about what is being said, and how this is going to impact future relations between India and Singapore. As you can see, I've been joined by Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Mr. Faisal in the studios. As always, thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with me in the show. And we've also been joined for our first segment by a regular now on our show as well, and I'll introduce him as soon as he's joined us. He's going to be Andrei Kortunov, who is the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council, and we'll welcome him as soon as he's part of the debate. But before we go to him, we of course understand that the situation in Russia and with regards to Ukraine, of course, is a precarious one, and it's developing and evolving in all different ways, and we are yet to figure out which way it's going to take. Farrukh, recently, in the last couple of days, we saw that perhaps the situation is getting better. We've seen proposals getting exchanged. We've seen a response. There was talk about troop withdrawal, but it is being said now that that's not happening. In fact, the opposite is happening. What do you see in the future in terms of how this is going to develop?
Right, Sana, it is very important to remember the strange kind of times we are living in, particularly about the kind of escalations and de-escalations that have been taking place. This is post-truth society, and both sides actually believe that they are entitled not to have their own opinion, but to their own facts as well. It seems that America keeps on pointing out that the build-up continues, and we haven't seen any evidence of pullback so far, because we have seen the maps from the satellites. But on the other side, when you listen to the Russian government, they say that America is actually unleashing an informational war on Russia.
Something that US is also charging Russia against.
Yeah, exactly. That continues to happen. But there are two things that are very intriguing, and you should be actually keeping focus of both. One, what is happening on Ukraine border. The other one, what is happening in Canada, where truckers have actually patronized the capital, right? These two are important because it seems that the Western intellectuals keep on saying that what is happening in Canada is also being done because Russia wants it to be done, right? On the other side, if you read history, particularly the First World War, the situation was similar. For months, it took, countries an year to mobilize their forces, and yet nobody stopped it. So it is very frightening because now everyone has nukes and they have the kind of firepower to destroy the world many times over. And simultaneously, there seems to be hawks that keep on pushing them to further escalation. This has to stop. And honestly, I've always, when it came to suggestions or recommendations, I've been very honest to everybody, even my worst enemies, right? If President Putin was watching this or this message reached him, I would actually beg him to take a step back, because it is not worth it to escalate at this time. In the end, like the First World War, what will it do? It will unleash the dogs of racism and fascism all over the Europe and world if there is going to be an escalation of war.
But will Putin actually, Faisal, with regards to taking a look at this whole situation, pull back without saying, or the fact that this is something that is of value to Russia, or will in fact be able to bear much cost before it decides to do so? Because of course, the point at which this issue stands right now, it's not an easy place to back off from.
Sana, obviously it would all depend on what sort of assessment is being made by Russia. Obviously, you know, they have been assessing the situation in the Europe, and that's why they are there. There are two you know, sort of scenarios which I can predict. Number one, in case of you know, Russia, if Russia does something, it would be contained to Donetsk region, because that is the region where the trouble is. And in that case, there will be two situations. Number one, obviously NATO builds up more troops in Romania, and if they do it, then we need to look at it from two angles. Number one, are they there to you know, have humanitarian crisis of Ukraine under control, and if people are moving in Romania, then they are there to obviously take care of them. Number two is, are they there to you know, launch an attack on Russian troops? This would be obviously the office of you know, President Putin. They would be looking into it, and of course their assessment would decide whatever they want to do in the coming future.
Okay, let's also welcome in our show Andrei Kortunov, who has joined us online. Thank you very much, Mr. Kortunov, for joining us. He is the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council, and thank you for being part of the debate. With reference to what is being discussed, of course, whether there is a troop withdrawal or not, we saw that the Russian side kept on saying that they are actually planning to withdraw some of the troops, and then we see the US and NATO forces accusing Russia of bringing in more troops to the border. What really is going on? Is there troop withdrawal happening or not?
Well, I think that the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian border is secondary. I'm much more concerned about what's going on in Donbass right now, because this is where apparently we can observe an escalation, and the leadership of the breakaway republics have already announced evacuation to neighboring Russian regions. I think it is dangerous because just a couple of days ago, the Russian parliament, the State Duma, has appealed to the president of the Russian Federation to go on with the diplomatic recognition of these breakaway republics. And if this happens, if the Kremlin agrees to diplomatically recognize the two republics of East Ukraine, that would definitely mean the end of the Minsk agreements, and that would lead to a new major crisis in Europe. I think that the situation at the Russian-Ukrainian border is more or less under control. I don't think that Russia plans to invade, but Donbass might be a catalyst for a serious crisis.
Right, Dr. Kortunov, let me ask you about something which actually came to surface a few days ago when the US State Department, while briefing, claimed that there is a chance of a false flag attack by the Russian side and something might happen. Then we saw reports coming from Russian media that in Donbass or other places adjacent, the Russian forces and the dissidents in Ukraine actually came under attack from the Ukrainian side. Do you see that this might actually build up Washington's case? Because in the end, they can always say that this was a false flag and Russia actually wanted to move ahead using this excuse.
Well, my take is that if you go to Donbass, you'll see that on both sides of the front line, there are many people who would like to fight, who believe that war is their job. And these people and these groups and these institutions are not really interested in any political settlement. And they keep fighting for 80 years. And definitely any political resolution of the crisis would deprive them of their current positions, of the revenues, of their political standing. So I do not exclude loose cannons on both sides. I don't think it is a provocation by Moscow, by Kiev, but I can imagine that these loose cannons might try to escalate the situation to serve their own interests.
Right, Mr. Karsanov, with reference to the U.S. proposals that have been shared with Russia earlier, we know that the response has been given to that as well, and we're yet to find out what really that is. But with all that's going on at the moment, does this even hold any value? Can we really hope to expect something out of it that is going to be substantial to the development of this crisis?
Well, I think that it really depends on the balance and how it is seen from the Russian side, because if you look at the list of U.S. proposals, there are some valuable ideas there. And there are some ideas that were initially advanced by Russia a year ago, 2 years ago, and later on they were either rejected or ignored by the Western side. Now it seems that the West, that Washington and Brussels are ready to discuss these ideas. Of course, these ideas do not touch the core of Russia's concerns, the enlargement of NATO, but they are not unimportant. I think that there is a clear value in some of them.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Kotanov, I just wanted to ask, the recent meetup between, Russian President Putin and Chinese President Xi, do you think that this meetup has given more confidence to Russia on the Western front with the Ukraine? And if so, how?
Well, let me say that as far as Ukraine itself is concerned, I think that China is reluctant to take sides. It's a major trading partner of Ukraine. It's a major investor in Ukraine. But if you look at the joint Russian-Chinese statement that was signed by Chairman Xi and President Putin in Beijing in early February, you'll see a very clear solidarity of the two sides as far as NATO is concerned. Both Russia and China are opposed to what they perceive as an unduly advance of NATO to Central Eastern Europe. Both consider NATO to be a hostile institution and not really a defensive alliance.
Right. Mr. Kotanov, considering where the situation stands at the moment, what really will be an easy way out for Russia to be able to back off from the situation as it is now without perhaps gaining everything that it's demanding for? What can they go ahead with and say that they've had enough, they've gotten enough out of what they could have from the current situation and can back off from the situation without really losing face?
I might take a very soft approach, but I believe that something is better than nothing, which means that, first of all, Russia should consider seriously the proposals that it got from Washington and Brussels. Second, it should insist on Kiev abiding by the provisions of the Minsk agreements. And it doesn't mean that Russia should drop completely its other demands and its other proposals. But it should probably put some of these proposals on a back burner. And maybe if the relationship gets better, these ideas can be revisited in due time, including some moratorium on the NATO enlargement.
Right. Dr. Kartanov, earlier you spoke about loose cannons, and many of them. Now, if I ask you to actually war game the whole thing, and being a student of history, if you look at the examples where such a big number of loose cannons are there, the biggest question is, shouldn't we then think or assume that a conflict is a fait accompli? because if really the two sides cannot control such elements, they will invariably create some kind of flashpoint that might actually lead to confrontation that will be out of control for all sides?
I think that the danger is there, and I'm not too optimistic, but I think that with due political will, you can probably neutralize loose cannons. At least you can prevent them from leading the situation to an uncontrolled escalation. Again, we know, I agree with you, we know some examples in history when large conflicts emerged against the will of participating sides. But I think that there is still time and there is still a chance to sort it out and to bring these loose cannons to order and to prevent an uncontrolled development of the conflict.
Can you give us some time frame, a sense of time? How much time do we have before any of these loose cannons actually go off and things cannot be controlled any longer?
Well, my take is that the situation should be somehow decided within next week or two. By the end of February, we should get more clarity than we have now.
All right,
Yeah.
let's hope that we actually do get some sort of clarity on that. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Dr. Kotanov, is Russia taking all of this situation, looking at NATO as a whole, or the different countries, they have a different stance against Russia? Are you looking at different countries as they have their own stance, and in future, of course, bilateral relations with them countries would, be counted just because of this Ukrainian crisis?
Well, you're right, absolutely. I think that Russia takes into account existing differences within the North Atlantic Alliance. There are countries like Poland, which are clearly very critical of Russia, but there are countries like Italy or even Turkey. You know, Russia sold S-400 very modern systems to Ankara. It works with Turkey in Iran and on some other issues. But I think that there is also an understanding in Russia that NATO is not going to fight for Ukraine. It would definitely impose economic sanctions on Moscow, and these sanctions might be quite painful. But I don't think that in Moscow they consider a large-scale conflict with the NATO alliance, at least at this juncture.
Right, Mr. Kortanov, but with reference to, of course, what Russia keeps on talking about, is there anything that is a no compromise zone for Russia, something that they will not be able to back off from, perhaps with regards to Ukraine being a NATO member or the eastern expansion of NATO? Is there something that's a hard limit for Russia?
I think that if you take the immediate future, the red line is full-scale Ukrainian offensive operations in Donbas, because that would affect almost 1 million of Russian citizens who live there. So this is a red line. Speaking of the Ukrainian membership to NATO, this is definitely a red line, but this is not something which is likely to happen anytime soon. So right now, Russia is more concerned about what it believes to be a gradual expansion of the NATO military infrastructure on the territory of Ukraine, even without Ukraine being a full-fledged member of the alliance. And this is something that Russia would resist.
Right. Dr. Katarov, last time we spoke, you also expressed hope that this could lead in the direction of disarmament. Do you think that you still have that hope? Because in the end, it is about weaponization. And then we saw what Belarus and its president said, that there is a possibility that he might allow nuclear weapons on his soil if there is need, sir.
Well, I'm still hopeful that if this crisis is resolved, and if the Russia's intention is to contain the NATO military infrastructure movement to the east, the best way to do it would be to try multilateral arms control agreements like the CFE agreement that was signed back in 1990. And then the adapted version of CFE was signed in Istanbul in 1999. Definitely we cannot repeat it. Now it's a very different situation, but it tells us that if there is political will, you can definitely contain the military infrastructure of the NATO alliance moving eastward. It is difficult, but it is doable.
All right, Mr. Kortanov, as you know, there are, of course, the situation has been likened to the Cold War era. Do you think that these parallels are far-fetched, or do you see any way to them?
Well, of course, history doesn't repeat itself, and the situation today is quite different from what it was during the Cold War. We don't have this ideological confrontation that we had during the Soviet times. But unfortunately, we are moving in the direction of a new bipolarity. And maybe for the West, the real challenge will be China rather than Russia. But Russia will definitely be in the same basket with Chinese, and the United States is likely to pursue the policy of dual containment, which is targeted on both Beijing and Moscow. So unfortunately, we are moving in this direction. I don't think that we are there. I think that the Cold War was a system of hierarchy which does not exist anymore, but we are moving in the wrong direction for sure.
Right. You were talking about ideology and the differences. We have seen, this rhetoric or so-called ideology coming from the likes of Alexander Dugin, and then we are seeing similar kind of ideologies or philosophies coming from the Western quarters as well. Don't you think that there is a very aggressive attempt to regenerate or rekindle some kind of ideological confrontation as well?
Well, I think that definitely there are attempts to do that, but I think that societies today are very different from what they were half a century ago. We have people who have access to information, who use the internet, who are not constrained within their own boundaries. It is much more difficult to impose any kind of ideology on contemporary societies than it was half a century ago, and I hope that societies will continue to be ideology resistant, even in places like Russia or Ukraine.
Yeah, Dr. Kortanov, we know that Kremlin and Washington, of course, they have differences elsewhere as well in the world. Do you think that this Ukrainian crisis, it would affect all of the other conflicts where Russia and US are the parties?
Well, if the situation goes sour and if we have a major conflict, it will have a detrimental impact on all the dimensions of the US-Russian relations and relations between Russia and the European Union, including economic relations and humanitarian relations, relations related to regional crisis. I think it would be difficult to continue cooperation even in areas where our interests coincide or overlap, like, for example, GCPOA or the Arctic region. It would be very difficult to maintain these pockets of cooperation if confrontation gets the upper hand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrei Kortanov, for being with us and staying above the time. I was told you had to leave at 9:25, but thank you very much for staying with us longer than that. With reference to, of course, what is going on in Russia, there's so much that still remains to be seen. And as the story develops, we'll see what happens. But the timeline, Farrukh, that Kortanov is giving seems quite ambitious.
Right, but amazingly, this is also something very funny here. First of all, let me compliment Dr. Kortanov. Every time I listen to him, I get some hope, and he is a person after my heart. But regarding what is happening, if you remember, in January and December, we were told that in February, because ice will be there and the grounds will solidify, there will be some movement. Luckily, there hasn't been anything of the sort, right? So I can hope, and we can hope, that this timeline keeps on extending, and at the very least, it keeps on extending and there's no conflict. Secondly, he was talking about the fact that societies are complicated, human beings are complicated, and nobody can impose an ideology. But I tell you what can, and that is a conflict. If you start a conflict that goes beyond the immediate region, and then it escalates into deaths of thousands or hundreds of thousands.
Between ideology and conflict.
And then, remember what happened back in 1919, when Germany thought that it was winning and it lost. And in the end, what happened? These three cousins who brought Europe to a war, in the end, they unleashed Nazis and Bolshevism and so many other things. So that can happen. There is a lesson of history. Please step back and don't fight.
And obviously, Sana, we don't want a conflict, to go ahead for another reason, and that is that our Prime Minister Imran Khan is invited in there. So we don't want any more escalations. Why? Because when we want to see our Prime Minister in Kremlin, we don't want to see any conflict.
And honestly, let me thank the Prime Minister for going there, because finally, Faisal seems to have stepped back from his idea that Donetsk is going to be invaded and there's going to be a colonization.
And then, of course, there are economic interests as well. So, like, conflict is going to be harmful for all of us. And we hope that instead of that, we can develop our relations and benefit from all that the world has to offer. We'll move on to our next segment, which is with reference to what has been spoken about in terms of the parliamentary standards and the way things are being run in India. This has been said by the Singaporean Prime Minister. He was speaking with reference to India as an example to what is going on in the world. Before we talk further on this, let's take a look at what exactly was said.
Nehru's India has become one where, according to media reports, almost half the MPs in the Lok Sabha have criminal charges pending against them, including charges of rape and murder. Though it is also said that many of these allegations are politically motivated.
Playing it again and hearing it over again. But it's important that we emphasize on this and try and understand what exactly is being said.
I disagree
Before let's moving on to what India responded, let's just dissect what really has been said here. Because he said something, but then he also said that perhaps they're politically motivated. Yes, Faisal, I think you have something to add to that.
I completely disagree with the Prime Minister of Singapore on the basis that it is not the half of the parliamentarians, is the whole parliament is, a criminal when it comes to silence. They are demonstrating right now in today's India, they are demonstrating criminal silence. And to me, everyone is a criminal in their parliament, in their Lok Sabha, because they kept quiet on the build-up in Kashmir, draconian laws in Kashmir, then laws against the Muslims, they kept quiet on that. If we talk about treatment of minorities, they kept quiet on that. If we talk about treatment of Muslims, especially when it comes to crisis like hijab crisis and all of these, they kept quiet. And lynchings day by day are increasing in India, of not only Muslims but of Dalits as well. And by the way, yesterday I was going through a video shared by another Indian. It said that a Dalit woman was disallowed to enter in one of the mandir, and Dalits are the ones who categorize themselves by themselves. They categorize themselves as Hindus, but they are not allowed to be Hindus. If we talk about the treatment of farmers, they kept quiet on that. I'm talking about the parliamentarians. So to me, the whole Lok Sabha, it's criminal.
I understand.
And truth is always bitter.
And that's an important point, because Farrukh, it's not just that someone is charged with something. What Faisal is saying is that because they're responsible and accountable or in that position, they are also accomplice. Is that true?
No, I'm going to disagree with that. Although I'm going to agree with Prime Minister Lung, who is a brilliant politician, and I think India should stop its temper tantrums, because they are embarrassing all of us, right? I think Prime Minister Lung and his father both have made Singapore into a great economy, and we should be actually seeking inspiration from them instead of harassing them because they said something which has been actually based on India's own reports.
Sure,
right?
yes.
India's parliament, half of it is has criminal charges. But regarding what Faisal was saying, I mean, you keep on following their channels and their debates in the parliament as well. They are very good, conscientious people as well. For example, one name that comes to my mind is Mahua Moitra, right? She is from TMC, and she is the one who very brilliantly keeps on confronting fascism, authoritarianism, standing in the parliament, knowing that while she goes out, somebody can attack her. So they are good people also. The problem is that the entire system is so rigged. One by one, the Hindutva crowd has taken over every institution. Supreme Court, the high courts, the local courts, the media, their armed forces, their intelligence, their criminal investigation enterprises, their police, everything is compromised. In that situation, the people who are confronting it might not have a lot of voice because they don't or they cannot appear on the national television, but they are there and they are raising their voices. But that doesn't give me any comfort. What worries me is the fact that the Prime Minister spoke about that this country was supposed to be an example of democracy or of evolution, because finally it got freedom from colonialism, and it actually boiled down into a mess, a cesspit of corruption and evil.
And I want to talk more about that in terms of how exactly does a country or a nation deteriorate like that? What sort of factors are into play for the situation to reverse itself on such a large scale? Yes, Farrukh.
Yeah, Farrukh.
Right, there are books that have been written, and they are about the sociology of how institutions actually decayed. There's a book called How to Kill a Democracy, and there's another that is Modi's India by Professor Jaffarlot. He's a French scholar, brilliant one. You must read it because it tells you how India's 70 years of journey has actually been responsible for what is happening there right now. The way the rich allowed the poor to suffer, and the way the middle classes got selfish and they kept on actually exploiting the situation, and then the collusion of the business community and the religious elite. The way it has hijacked the country. Remember that Adani in 2002 only had $2 billion, right? $200 million. Then 5 years later, he has only $2 billion. Now he is the richest man in Asia, right? It is said that India, 4 people rule India, all 4 from Gujarat, 2 are selling it and 2 are buying it, right? So that is the state of affairs at this moment. And if you see societies which actually don't pay attention to their own people and allow callousness in the name of inequality, in the name of casteism, will invariably come up with exactly what is happening in India, and it is not the end of the story. You might get some kind of correction tomorrow when UP's elections turn out to be positive in result, or 2024 when there is some kind of break from what is going on.
Right.
But then these people know how to turn their losses into victory and destroy everything.
Absolutely. With reference to what the Singaporean Prime Minister has spoken about, Faisal, do you think that, of course, we understand and the way India is reacting, that they've taken it to heart and perhaps, they're not going to let go of this as easily as they perhaps should and accept the way the situation is. How impactful will this be on the relationship between the two countries? Will this be forgotten soon?
But it will be forgotten. Why? Because obviously they have, sort of good relations as well between both of the countries. What I see is already, the ambassador of Singapore in New Delhi was summoned, and later on we might see clarifications about it and all. But to me, if they have highlighted, this aspect that half of the parliament is, of course, criminals, a bunch of criminals sitting inside, it has the basis as well. They forgot to mention that, the India which used to be portrayed as secular India, it is not secular anymore. Slowly and gradually, as Farrukh was mentioning earlier about, the process that how it has come to here. To me, I think, the rule of BJP, the current rule of BJP, it has injected their own people with hate. And that hate is being seen in colleges and universities today, and that hate is being seen on the roads of India today when somebody lynches Muslims, when somebody lynches all of these minorities, including Dalits in India. How it all happened? A country that started with the secular, calling itself secular and having a constitution, secular constitution, slowly and steadily they have placed themselves somewhere where secularism is not important for the country. Rather, I should say RSS Hindutva ideology is important to them, and that ideology is forcing every section of the society to mold itself in a position that is favorable to RSS and that is acceptable to RSS, and they call it as their own success. If we talk about the Indian Army, all of these commanding officers, CEOs at the CEO level, it is famous within the army ranks of India that if you want to get a promotion, you have to align yourself with the Hindutva ideology. Otherwise, you would be ignored and you would be superseded and you would be sent home. Why it is happening? It is happening just because of one reason, that systematically this current regime of India, I would call it a regime, it is injecting hate in the society.
Which regime? Arabic wala or English wala? Right? Regime in English, Arabic means something else, right?
Farrukh, earlier we were talking about ideology, and even as we speak about India, we understand that ideology is an important force, and we've seen that perhaps it's seeping into the public and it's ingrained in people's thoughts so deeply that it's perhaps harder and harder for us to be able to reach out to people in terms of them being able to see the situation as it is. And this of course means that the enemy is far larger than perhaps Modi or the government in place at the moment. How are we going to tackle this?
Right, and tackling is an important question, but before that something else comes. As a lifelong Indophile, as lifelong student of Indian history, Indian literature, Indian religions, a person who has actually read Vedas and umpteen other religious books cover to cover more than once, I tell you, we have been hoodwinked. When we talk about Modi and what he actually represents, we might actually thank him for blowing the lid of the cesspit that India has been, right? And I tell you why. While you must have heard that saying that they came for that person first, I didn't say anything, then they went for that person and I didn't say anything, and finally they came for me and there was no one left, right? It is what has been happening in India for centuries against Dalits. The poorest of poor, who are not even allowed to cast their shadow over water wells. Their dead bodies are not allowed to pass from your agrarian land, right? The way, the kind of callousness and dehumanization went on for centuries, and nobody stopped it, not Gandhi, not Nehru, nobody else, right? That actually tells you what is wrong with India. At this moment, Dalits and the OBCs and others which are a scheduled caste are basically a majority in India. That's why Narendra Modi will never allow you to conduct any kind of survey, right? The caste survey. Why? Because it will expose the fact that Brahmins are not more than 5% and that Kshatris, the next who are very important, are not more than 6 or 7% further. So it is an elite capture of Brahmins and Kshatris against the interest of Dalits, and this kind of carelessness, because it has been there and we never noticed it because India kept on projecting this image of democracy. Now everything is coming to the fore, and now one by one they'll come for everyone. Now they're coming for Muslims and Christians. Next they'll go for Sikhs, then they go for others. In the end, it is not about Hinduism it is about that violent minority that has a lead capture. It will go after everyone.
Yeah.
No solution.
And Faisal, with regards to what Farrukh has spoken about, we understand that this is something that India does in order to hide and not be able to expose what's going on, right? In terms of bringing in observers or actually carrying out these surveys. But at the end of the day, we've seen that other things that India has done, perhaps the media propaganda campaign, for example, or what's going on in Kashmir, is being exposed. It has been highlighted. Yet, there's nothing that really happens. So what really is the fear of being exposed? Does India really have a fear of being exposed? What does it give?
They don't have any fears. The biggest fear a country would always have is obviously, the bigger countries trying to shut them up. But today's India, of course, they know that they have placed themselves very well in terms of against China as well. US-China trade war going on, and they have placed themselves as frontline against China. So they are safe in that context, and they being a biggest economy in the region. In terms of their population, it's a source of they call it as that can linger on against all of the criticism they will be facing from the Western side. But here, as always, Farrukh always talks about hope. Let me talk about...
No, I don't talk about hope. In India, I have actually given up hope.
Exactly.
I have a hope. I have a hope for Farrukh today from India. I think I would be the first one who's talking about this. My source within India, they are telling me that there is an in-house rift going on between Yogi Adityanath and Amit Shah.
That is some hope.
Yeah, that is some hope. Why? I should tell you. Gujarat and UP. They are fighting each other right now, and that is a clandestine fight which is going on the faces. While they face each other, there are smiles, but of course they are thinking about post Modi who comes into power.
But
Amit Shah,
the hope is not India breaking down,
Amit Shah,
right?
What Amit Shah is doing,
building India.
Amit Shah is counting on the votes, and he doesn't want Yogi Adityanath to win in UP. Why? Because he is not alone against Yogi Adityanath. He has somebody very powerful from within the system with him, and that is Janan Narwane. Janan Narwane and Amit Shah, they don't want Yogi Adityanath to win this election. Why? Because they see that if he wins, of course, RSS would be bidding all over Yogi.
What are we getting out of
Let me
disabuse
you of the notion that Yogi Adityanath is part of RSS. He is not. He comes from elsewhere, and he is part of some other movement. He has never been RSS, and that is the tragedy. That's why I keep on saying that this competition between Hindu Mahasabha, this group, and then Shiv Sena. Imagine, now we are so frigging hopeless. The Shiv Sena is the hope now, right? The country, the organization that has been bullying people. But Sana, I have to ask her, speaking of hope, I have to ask Faisal a question.
Why not Sana today?
No.
We should ask Sana.
No, I have a question for you, my dear friend, and then I will explain why I'm asking. Hey, Faisal, how's your good friend Ajit Doval?
He's not feeling well.
Okay. Do you know, speaking, I cannot call it karmic hope, but I can call it karmic humor. Something very funny happened. Remember I told you all that how India kept on asking for suspension of patents on vaccines, COVID vaccines, and when it could not, all of a sudden there was explosion in the world with the conspiracy theories regarding chips in the bodies and how you are mind controlled and controlled by others, right? And then I told you that it had Indian influence campaign, especially Ajit Doval's fingerprints all over it. Something very funny happened day before yesterday. Someone actually flew from Bengaluru, then rented a car, stayed in a hotel, took that car to Delhi, to Ajit Doval's house, and rammed it into the door And then when he was caught apprehended and questioned, he said that I have a chip in my body and I'm being controlled by somebody else, right?
Wow.
And this is not the funny bit. The funny bit is they actually scanned him for the chip.
Oh, that's what I was about to say.
That-
What I was about to say.
When societies go mad,
That
they
is
really
the
go
state of the
mad.
affairs. Exactly. Yes, Faisal,
Yeah.
what you were going to say?
Sana, we keep on, you keep on asking us questions. We just wanted you to say something about, whatever has said by PM Lee. If you could say something about
You
it.
know, at this table, I'm the only one who can ask questions or should be asking questions. So you're the ones who are answering the questions, but I'll let you reverse the role for a bit. You can have that for the guests on the show, but not for me. But I'll give you this much, Faisal. With regards to hope, I have some. And I want to hold on to some in every situation and be able to see that there is possibility for some sort of change happening. I believe in the good
India?
in humanity, in India as well. I believe in the good in humanity. I believe in the good in people, and I believe they do exist in India as well. Whether or not they will have the power or they say today, tomorrow, 100 years from now, I don't know. But it exists, and perhaps it's enough for now to be able to count on that as a possibility that there could be change.
Regarding
10 out of
10 out of 10, actually 20, is that arithmetically that makes any sense, because hope is a good thing, but hope is not a policy, right?
Sure,
The problem
yes.
is that we have to look at the realities on ground. And regarding your hope, there is a share also, माना कि तगाफुल ना करोगे लेकिन हाथ हो जाएंगे हम तुमको खबर होने तक.
Absolutely.
Right?
We hope that does not happen.
Yeah, that I know that you are not going to be late, but till the time you are informed, we will be destroyed. I don't have any hope in India, unfortunately, and that kills me. But I see that people like you should actually have some hope, and that might actually be hope in itself.
And what's important here, though, Farrukh, is that if you're proven wrong, you will actually be very happy. So
Yeah.
it's a good thing that hopefully that is something that's going to happen.
L-
Have a
prove
really
me
nice
wrong.
weekend, everyone, and we'll be back with more news on the debate on Monday at 9 p.m. only on PTV World.